Settling down, so I think we're ready to start. I don't know if there's anybody in the back that needs to come in, but the door is open still. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the closing event of the OpenU project. My name is Nikolina Đurić. I'm a communication manager and a board member at the Erasmus Student Network, who is also your host today. I'm here. I'm going to be your moderator for the event, so I'm going to be introducing all the amazing speakers we have today. And well, welcome to the final event. I hope you had a lovely lunch, and if you were here from this morning, I hope you had a very productive morning session with all the project partners. To start off the event, we have the project coordinator with us, Julien Fermont, who's going to give an opening address and opening session, so to say. So a little round of applause for him.
Thank you, Nikolina. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, this is it. We are at the end of the project, this great and beautiful project that is OpenU. And I would have loved to show you the picture Yasmin showed this morning at the Parisian opening in February 2019. When the project opened in Paris, we knew that the task would be great, but in reality, it was greater than this. As that wasn't enough, the project adapted to current events and demands. European University Alliances were born and the pandemic hit us. We revised our work plan twice, validated by the European Commission, without ever lowering our quality and requirements. And I can tell you with pride, we have succeeded collectively in achieving the objectives set 3 times. So thank you very much to each and everyone here in this room and online as well. This project is essential for most of our ministries and universities who want to collaborate with each other and also for the European University Alliances. But we don't forget how it is so much important to open this project to the external public of the university as well. We have come a long way altogether, and this day materializes all the vitality and the sustainability of the OpenU project. The recommendations expected today mark the end of a cycle. The cycle of the funding project, from experimentation to recommendation. But they also open a new chapter from recommendation to support for experimentation in each of our 6 countries. The sustainability of the project depends on this, in addition to its Bloom platform. This circle is virtuous and will continue to be long after the funding, not only in our 6 countries, but beyond. This structuring project for our ministries and institutions aims to last. Its Bloom platform, managed by Freie Universität Berlin, and we have one of its representatives here, Johannes Posel, will be the support. As for the pedagogical guidelines, they will continue to be nourished by the research of a historical actor of higher education in Europe, EADTU, represented here today on site by George and Pete. Finally, I would like to thank the DAAD and the Erasmus Student Network Belgium for their work in organizing this afternoon. I would like also to thank the European Commission for its support through this 4 years project. Once again, we thank you for being here on site and online, and I wish you good sessions.
Thank you, Julien. So as already was mentioned, the OpenU project is a project funded by the European Commission under the Erasmus Plus Key Action 3. And it does focus on digitalization of the higher education. And today we have a part of the session now for about 30 minutes or so, where we're going to talk about the policy recommendations and policy aims of the OpenU project. And the first one to talk is Kathleen Clancy from DAAD. And she's going to have a brief introduction into policy experimentation in the European higher education. So a round of applause.
Super, thank you very much. I don't know if you want to introduce Dagmar as well, because we will just be swapping between each other. We didn't tell you, but...
Okay, Dagmar, yes, it's true. Okay, Dagmar, Williams, the two of you together then. Okay, you're going to be presenting from there. I'm going to give you the mic. The clicker is here if you need it, I don't know. And who starts first?
Perfect, thank you so much. Yes, so we have a lot. You see I have a lot of paper, no, not that much. So get settled in, sit back, relax, and enjoy while I figure out which direction we go. Yes, so we're going to go through the policy aims in the OpenU project. Then we'll have country-specific priorities with ministry representatives, which I'm really looking forward to, as I personally am also fairly new to the project, and this is also so we were working a lot with information that had already been collected, so I'm happy to hear best practice examples live and in color. And then we're going to have, and then we'll have a short break, and then Dagmar and I will continue to let you know how we kind of concluded our national and European policy recommendations, which will then end in an open discussion. So a quick refresher. I think a lot of the people present here are already very familiar with the policy framework we're working within, and this is kind of the landscape of European digitalization efforts as we started within the OpenU project. So just trying to flip back to what we were trying to achieve, and then you can be the judge of what actually happened in the end. So we have a fully aligned project design with EU policy priorities and also some national priorities with the participating countries. So for one, that is the joint report on education and training, where the overall ambition of OpenU was to refine skills for employability by improving lifelong and learning opportunities and creating open and digital teaching and learning environments, and supporting educators, which I think we saw beforehand as well. Then we also have the renewed agenda for higher education from 2017. So OpenU set out to support well-designed higher education programs and curricula by structuring new possibilities afforded by technology for teaching and learning, open, online, blended, MOOCs. I think we all know what context we're speaking within. And we also kind of had this extracurricular message, the third mission that higher education institutions often have, which is also involving society at large. We don't have it on the slide, but we also, of course, have to reference the new skills agenda from 2017. So OpenU also set out to cater for increased diversity on the student population by providing open learning opportunities with digital tools. And the Digital Education Action Plan 2020, let me quote, "Education is to be the backbone of growth and inclusion in the EU." And in this context, of course, OpenU also identified a key objective to prepare students to meet the challenges of this new world and make better use of digital technology for teaching and learning. And finally brings us to the European Universities Initiative. I think the speech was actually also at the Sorbonne, so the Macron speech. And so the European University Alliances explicitly highlighted the need for an IT infrastructure and secure environment, and we've heard a lot about that also. Then we, of course, also have national policies, and I will just shortly mention them because I'm sure they won't be as detailed as they could be. But for example, with regards to French policies, OpenU is fully aligned with the French strategy for higher education and contributing to the European dimension of curricula and reinventing higher education for the 21st century. You can tell I'm quoting. With regards to German policies, we're also aligned with various policies the Federal Ministry of Education and Research launched, for example, a strategy on open educational resources, but also the overarching government strategy on digitalization, which affects not only education but also other sectors. Portuguese policy, we also had hoped that the project would contribute to the internationalization of higher education and investment in mobility and the reinforcement of the international dimension of higher education institutions. But Pedro will be telling us more about that in a second. We are also aligned with Belgian and Flemish policies, with the internationalization strategy also. and the existing action plan with the main focus on student mobility. And I wonder if this is still the slogan. Magali can tell us later on, but I have written here brains on the move, which I think is quite a nice way of also addressing the problems of kind of brain drain, but also going into brain circulation. So brains on the move, I think, puts that very nicely. And then also, of course, aligned with Spanish national priorities and the Spanish government, which has a digital agenda related to the 17 regional governments and was also supported by EU structural funds. And at long last, I'm very impressed by your listening skills. Also, a look at the Latvian policies, which had adopted education development guidelines from 2014 to 2020, and these have now been revised. And they also set internationalization as one of the main aims of higher education with the key goal as well. So OpenU strengthened and put forward the coordination process that has been initiated between the different digital initiatives of EU member states within the education and training working groups on modernization of higher education and digital skills and competences. Just kind of around our working, the consortium was built, I'll go into it a bit later, by using an asymmetrical approach to policy experimentation. So this means we can either involve public authorities jointly with the higher education institution or without a higher education institution, or we also just involved higher education institutions without a public authority in their country. And this was kind of an asymmetrical approach, hoping to improve transnational cooperation. And I think you mentioned it beforehand that we also had this problem of maybe only listening to policymakers and not to practitioners. So alone the project setup is kind of trying to engage with this problem. Let's see, oh, sorry. Yeah, but we'll have detailed information on this in a sec. Here we have the key action number 3, policy support, which you've also heard a lot about. So the key action 3 provides support to policy cooperation at the European Union level, thereby contributing to the development of new policies, which can then trigger modernization and reforms. The actions implemented through this action are aimed to prepare and support implementation on the EU policy agenda, contribute to identifying and disseminating good practices. So I think we've heard many of them within the past 4 years, and as well carry out European policy experimentations, which we'll go into. So Firas outlined this also in his presentation, but the role of the German Academic Exchange Service within the OpenU project was that for the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, the DAAD coordinated the policy cluster of the OpenU project. And you can see here we have different elements. So we have the experimentation element, which was coordinated by Paris 1. And then the policy dialogue, which kind of sits above this, which included 6 ministries from, I'll mention them again, France, Belgium, / the Flemish community, Latvia, Portugal, Spain, and Germany. Sadly, we don't have a Spanish representative with us today. And the Erasmus Student Network, I don't want to forget to mention, because I think that's also very important to escape the echo chamber, which I think we sometimes are all in. So the work package 1 was coordinated by us, and this graph indicates the policy practice feedback loops, which you can see here. So the evaluation of the experimentation was fed into the OpenU, into our policy practice. So Firas and I had a few calls in the past few months, and then those also fed back into our policy recommendations. Then we focused on experimentation in particular. For one, these had different priority actions, which I'll just run through quickly. So for one, the development of multiple degrees in digital solutions, MOOCs, micromasters, micro-credentials, I think we all know the buzzwords here. Then the identification and creation and management of mobility windows, so thematic modules, courses, and also these should be co-created by different higher education institutions. Design and management of blended learning, development of online cooperation, online education activities developed by universities, integration of the OpenU hub with university digital infrastructure. I think we heard about this morning. I was really happy to hear it's already in concrete use and helpful. And change management for university leadership in a digital world. I think change management, whoever has ever tried to change something at a university will know that this is probably one of the most difficult points on the slide. And with that, I will pass along to Debbie.
Thank you. Welcome from me as well. So as laid out by Kathleen just now, not just from the European angle, but also from a national policy perspective, OpenU aims to contribute university networking, collaboration, but also to mobility. The project is dedicated to increasing innovation and promoting transnational education and access to learning. The aim is to provide public authorities with the opportunity to collect and to share good practices through the experimental development process, while the hub itself can contribute to deploying the key goals of European higher education policies. Consequently, it was important to involve public authorities in the project implementation process and to integrate their priorities to accomplish the result best fitting to the system from the policy experimentation project. And this involvement was achieved. You heard it already. High-level authorities were involved in the project as part of Work Package 1, also referred to as the policy cluster. And this policy cluster was coordinated by us, the German Academic Exchange Service, on behalf of the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And involved were the 6 already mentioned ministries, as well as the Erasmus Student Network. That's quite all right. I mean, there went a lot of work from all our partners into this, so I think it's just fair to mention them twice. This is kind of a nice setup because it is quite a diverse cluster setup. Because they are founding members of the EU as well as more recent members, and they are regionally well distributed. And also they differ considerably in size, and also they cover various approaches concerning higher education policies. For example, whether there are national or regional authorities on higher education. And as these countries also pose different challenges when it comes to languages of instructions in higher education and national language policies. So in this way, the policy cluster is very well set up to address policy issues that are representative and scalable for application on the European level and for other regional and national authorities as well, because it's so diverse. And in addition, the Erasmus Student Network contributed insights from the student perspective, especially from students interested and experienced in studying abroad in Europe. So the ESN is a partner in various other relevant projects, for example, the Erasmus Without Paper project. So there's a lot of valuable input from their side coming also into the project. So let's talk about aims and objectives. I would like to start with a quote. Following the definition of Han and Mills, quote, "The policy experimentation process refers to the process in which a top-down or bottom-up initiative is conducted at a limited scale to generate innovative policy options, test the implementation procedure, or evaluate the potential outcomes of a reform measure." And I think that is very well put because it entails all the dimensions that actually our policy experimentation in the policy cluster is also addressing. So the experimentation and policy evaluation of the OpenU project has actually the vision of providing and ensuring the evidence base to the policy cluster as a strategic body for the policy making by formulating policy recommendations on the basis of the project results. So we talked a lot in the morning about basing our policy recommendations on evidence and actually getting more evidence-based approaches into the creation of policies, and then also about implementing new ways of education. And I think that is a very relevant aspect. So the work package focused on conducting the policy dialogue regarding the experimentation activities and therefore evaluate the relevance of the project results in the context of Europe as well as in the context of the national policies. Ministries had the possibility to share results in their respective countries and involve national and regional stakeholders. Moreover, representatives of the experimentation, implementation and evaluation cluster and associated partners were tied into the policy cluster's working meetings to ensure national ownership and the scalability of the policy recommendations that will be presented later in the afternoon. And these policy recommendations, the final deliverables of the OpenU policy dialogue process, are based on the evidence gathered through the entire run of the project. And the detail how the OpenU Projektes finding and the Bloom Hub can be further rolled out on national and regional as well as on the European level will then be fed into. Thus, the project prepares future evidence-based policymaking that can achieve systemic impact on the regional, national and European level. The broader idea is to support governments to explicit policies, strategies and programs for transnational education, collaboration and mobility. This becomes part of a dialogue with institutions, so governments can use OpenU as an instrument for innovation in higher education. So kind of what feeds into this is the wish to help to maximize the learning and exchange, both from each other and also from the experimentations that are conducted. And that is kind of nicely reflected also in the mission statement of the policy cluster that you can see on the slide. You can see highlighted the aspects of open communication. The results of the policy dialogue sessions also informed the other activities of the projects. They informed the activities of the implementation, of the experimentation and evaluation. In addition, also work package 5, dissemination works closely with this work package to reach new institutions beyond the existing consortium. And having brought together expectations at the political level and having addressed support structure needed for successful implementation at the national and European level, the OpenU aims at a broad acceptance of the outcomes at the political level. The diversity of the countries involved in the project ensures the scalability of the resulting policy recommendations to other European countries, and hence it might work into like creating systemic impact. So how was this achieved? Let us briefly recap the activities and tasks of the policy cluster. You can see here the journey of the policy cluster. We started with a stock-taking exercise. The ministries reassessed their expectations from the project, and each of them selected specific policy priorities that are of particular interest for them on the national level. And around these topics, the ministries later hosted at least one high-level authorities meeting with the other cluster members and the stakeholders. The survey focused on the 3 thematic spheres: cooperation, mobility, and online and blended learning, as well as the priority actions named in the project proposal, and kind of revised them also. The outcomes were reflected into the exchanges with the other work packages and also fed into the revised work plan. Next up, there was the ministries reviewed the technical blueprint of the hub and the experimentation protocol with work package 4 to make sure the requirements from the side of the ministries are met in the design of the evaluation tools to feed the policy dialogue in a timely and accurate manner. And moreover, there were webinars on recent European and national policy developments. We conducted a series of informal webinars, informational webinars on current developments that were open to participants not only from the national authorities, but also to stakeholders at regional or communal level. And just last week we had our latest and very well received event with the colleagues from EATTU on the pedagogical guidelines developed within OpenU. So that was quite a nice lineup of events throughout the last couple of weeks. And last but not least, the policy dialogues. So major milestones in the policy dialogue process were the high-level authorities meeting. As mentioned, each of the ministries hosted at least one of these meetings on the topic of specific national priority. These meetings were open upon invitation to participants from OpenU Project Consortium, as well as relevant experts, researchers, stakeholders at the regional or national level. And through this high-level authorities meetings, the aim was to foster transnational exchange, so the sharing of knowledge and the unlocking of synergies between the OpenU project and national and regional projects and initiatives. So kind of like opening up this realm of knowledge sharing even a bit more. And the policy dialogue led to peer learning activities for national policies and also addressed specific priorities that were chosen by each of the ministries and very relevant to the national perspective. Also, in each of the meetings, there was a progress briefing on the experimentation and implementation work packages, so their input could also be worked into the discussions. The work meetings focused on those different aspects, which we will dive a little bit deeper into in the next slot, when all the ministries will share a little bit insights into their priorities. And the aspects from the policy experimentations were also worked into it, and I think that is actually what we are going to learn about more in the next session. So far, thank you for bearing with us about this little recap session, and please enjoy the next session.
Thank you so much for your presentation. In this round, we have one more presentation. It is about method and policy practice feedback loops by Firas Allaban. So a round of applause once more.
Once again, thank you very much to give me the speech for 2 times today. So hopefully it's not too boring. Actually, in this presentation, I'm briefly going to speak about the methods that we used in the evaluation cluster and how it works in the direction of feeding back the loops of policy and practices. Actually, from what we heard now from the policy cluster at this very rich presentation, actually to reach this recommendations by the end, it need a kind of systematic evaluation process and a very intensive cooperation between all the work packages, experimentations, and also implementation, as well as the disseminations project, all under the umbrella of the work package 6, Yasmin, that's coordinate this project. Actually, in the evaluation process, we worked in several layers to reach this goal. We started to provide information about the status quo of the institutional e-learning IT goals and the strategic documents. We investigate the virtual mobilities as a status quo in the institutional levels, international cooperations, all that under in the 3 spheres of the project that's focused on in the blended learning, virtual mobilities, and international cooperations. We also aimed, as I mentioned today, to open the discussions to bridge the gap between the policies and practices. This actually we expect to gather us to prevent or to show this knowledge and put it in hand with the policy cluster. This stemming with a kind of cooperation between the policy cluster and the evaluation cluster that's with the DAAD, and a 2 cycle, as I mentioned today, 2 cycle of evaluations and dialogue spheres. The aim was to show these recommendations in by the end of the first evaluation phase. This depends on three level of methods. The first one was very general. We're starting with analyzing the document, strategic document, and then we circulated the status quo questionnaire, and it ended with the interview in the first phase. The second phase is also started after the experimentation and targeted the designers and also the administrators, and it has been in 3 levels of questions. In order to filling this gap, we worked in the second phase as after the experimentation on different levels to identify the top-down and bottom-up. That's our colleague today, Marco, presented in the experimentations, as well as also we cooperated with also another project of Erasmus Plus, also funded, is TrendDL, also to stemming a kind of value co-creations between partners in tertiary and secondary education. In this one, maybe for the new person who joined us in this session, we tried to identify the horizontal and vertical gap between the experimentations, as well as how can we close this gap. And we discussed one of these gap as an academic bridge between the, as I mentioned, the secondary and tertiary education. You see the agility feedback and filling the gap is coming as a spiral model between the experimentations as a package, if you see here, from the OpenU, as well as between the different experimentation also in TrendDL. TrendDL is also an Erasmus Plus funded. So that's the presentation, and this is maybe lay the ground for the policy cluster to present the policy recommendation now.
Thank you so much. So as Mr. Firas has kind of given a segue to the next part, so we've talked here about very broadly about the policy priorities for the field in Europe and in the project in general, but now we're going to have all the countries presenting their national policy priorities, and also we're going to have something of a more a student perspective in the end of how it is actually that it is on the ground, so it's as to leave our echo chamber a little bit, right? So we're going to start with France, and Nadi El Houek, who is a pedagogical advisor for the French Ministry of Higher Education and Research. If he's online, okay. So we're gonna, I guess, have them on there.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Hear, yes. See, no. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if they can hear actually like this.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes, can't hear you back. Okay, Bianca is...
Okay, Bianca is texting.
I think that Bianca is also online. Okay, super Nicolina. So, good morning, everyone. I hope that I will not have the echo of me talking, because actually I'm juggling between... Okay. Is it okay? Yes. Actually, I'm both on YouTube live there's a small echo. Excuse me for this delay. I will try to stop the YouTube, and I think that you hear me now. There's a delay, actually. Okay. Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all, I really apologize for not being able to travel to Brussels today for this special closing event. Before starting with the policy priorities in France, which is now in the first slide, let me please start with thanking the Erasmus Student Network for hosting and organizing this event. A special thanks goes to the DAAD team, especially Kathleen and Dagmar, and before them, Katarina and Saskia, for professionally and rigorously leading this policy cluster work package. A warm thanks for all WP1 partners, my counterparts from Latvia, Portugal, Belgium, Flemish community, and Germany. And then finally, a warm thank you for Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne University for being an efficient coordinator of OpenU, a great facilitator, and of course a very performant university. It is noteworthy to mention that Paris 1 is the only French university to coordinate such a big key action 3 project. In this category of projects, OpenU, with its 2 million euro, is the biggest project in France and the third one on the European level. So while such projects usually are coordinated and managed by ministries, in our case, we delegated the overall coordination to Paris 1, and we definitely do not regret it. Cher Yasmine, cher Julien, thank you for your commitments. So let me start with our policy priorities. And before presenting you our national priorities, let me just remind you that in France, since 2007, we have a law for the autonomy of universities. And this law gives our higher education institutions more liberties, responsibilities, and financial autonomy. In other words, the Ministry of Higher Education and Research does not directly impose a unique and one common strategy. Every higher education institution has the right to define its own strategy. However, and this is what is on the first slide, however, we have a common philosophy. For the last 30 years, the Ministry and as well its higher education institution have been implementing an integrated general strategy on digitalization for higher education, following 3 main key values. First, give a free access to higher education to everyone. And second, freedom of learning, equality in access to knowledge, and will of sharing this knowledge. And third, enhancing citizenship with a firm belief that developing digital skills is part of it. But in France, we are facing one main difficulty, namely the massification of higher education and how to enhance a student's success rate and quality of life in such a context. How we think that digitalization is for us a mean to face this issue. And our mission in the ministry is to provide funding and resources in order to better accompany higher education institutions in their digital and pedagogical transformation. So if we pass to the next slide, please, let me present you the several innovative projects that we funded. We funded 8 digital thematic universities, producing, sharing, and mutualizing more than 40,000 open educational resources. We funded one and unique national MOOC platform called Fun MOOC. And we funded several self-assessment platforms. We have platforms to assess language or science assessments, but the most notable one is called PIX, PIX. It's one of the first, and perhaps it's the first and the only assessment platform implementing, meanwhile, the European Framework for Digital Competences. We funded several campus connectés, or digital campuses. Digital campuses are co-working spaces placed in rural areas, giving access to higher education to students living far from big cities, where most of our campuses are implemented. So Campus Connecté project main aim is to reduce social and territorial inequalities. We funded a flexible learning path. It's a 12 million euros project funding consortia of universities in order to build programs allowing student training customization and flexibility through a hybrid learning approach. And then during COVID-19 first lockdown, we funded up to 34 projects for a total of 40 million euros in order to foster hybrid learning in our higher education institution. And finally, we have a newborn project called DEMOS. DEMOS for Demonstrators in Higher Education. The aim is to ascertain and to sustain the digital transformation that has been already launched in our higher education institutions. So we are funding up to 17 projects for a total amount of 100 million euros in order to accompany higher education institution in a more holistic digital transformation, which covers digital strategies, learning path transformation, digital infrastructures, teachers' training and quality of life, and of course, student success and quality of life. Last but not least, this is the first funding call where we explicitly encourage the collaboration between higher education institutions and our French national edtech companies. Could we please pass to the next slide? So here are the recommendations we made from our high-level authority meetings that we organized in the French Ministry of Higher Education with, of course, the help of Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne University. The first HLAM of July 2020 focused on open educational resources and flexible study path. Its recommendations were, first of all, increasing student and staff mobility through digitalization, fostering blended learning, flexibilization and customization of study and training paths, decreasing failure and reorientation rates among students while dealing with an increasing number of student enrollments. And then the recommended approach to achieving those above named recommendations were first to build on existing solutions and to share solutions as well as best practices on national and transnational levels while addressing issues such as common standards, interoperability, accessibility, and quality assurance. If we pass to the next slide, please. So in this slide, I will present you the second HLAM of March 2022, who focused on evidence-based approaches to innovating digital higher education. And its recommendations were, first of all, implementing an evidence-based approach in the heart of the OpenU project by highlighting the multidisciplinary and the reflexive approach that underlies evidence-based approach. It's all about an agile process, and this is what was said by my colleague Firas before this. So the agile process of experimenting innovation in higher education with a very defined method, a very defined paradigm, a defined instructional design. So this would enable observing the learning process that is taking place and its respective outcomes. The analysis of the success factors then provides us the basis for transferability and scalability. And this is one of the main objectives of OpenU. So indeed, both the structure of the project, of OpenU project, and its funding scheme point at the common goal of bringing researchers, practitioners, and then policymakers together to bridge the gap between the political level and the institutional level and create a kind of virtuous circle consisting of developing knowledge from the experimentation of new pedagogical practices to the consideration of public policies in higher education. And I think this is what was said by Marco this morning and confirmed by Firas 10 minutes ago. So the critical point is that evidence-based policy making in higher education is lacking in testing of pedagogical results and in management strategies. Thus, questions during this HLAM about the production and the analysis of relevant indicators for monitoring and evaluating success were confronted and discussed during this day. So the question was raised on how to ensure that the measurement process and the definition of the indicators is made in a relevant and reflective manner. So anyhow, we should finish by understanding that indicators should serve both the legislator to monitor the effectiveness of the funded project, and then those indicators should also serve the project itself to reflect on its own progress. And finally, final slide, please. Is it the end of OpenU? I think that it's not the end of OpenU, it's just a new start. Because developments among the Bloom Hub should continue. Furthermore, what should be continuously enhanced is the Bloom Hub users' adoption. It should be adopted correctly by the users. So we should do more and more user experience, what we call UX. And beyond technical elements, beyond the Bloom Hub, we have a lot of experimental value and valuable knowledge stemming from the OpenU project. So those experiments and this knowledge should be appropriated, should be owned, and further, should be echoed by relevant stakeholders. And without being exhaustive, those productions and deliverables are, in addition to the Bloom Hub, all the models and guidelines that were produced, all the scientific documents and publications, and then all the policy recommendation of our policy cluster. Thank you for listening.
Are we back? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. El-Hayek, for sharing your perspective and also for joining us, even though it was just virtually. It was still very important to have you here with us. Now, coming to us from Latvia is Daiga Ivsina, on behalf of the Latvian Ministry of Research and Education, bringing her own country's perspective. So, join us on the stage.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to inform you about. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I would like to inform you about the updated policy priorities in Latvia. As you know, the first policy dialogue of the project OpenU was held in July 2019 in Riga. More than 3 years have passed, and it was a long time ago. During the first policy dialogue, Latvia presented ongoing and planned reforms in higher education work towards the development of this new skills strategy at national level and preparation of a study on digitalization level and practices at higher education institutions. And the language company Tilde presented language technologies and localization services developed by the company. We discussed the good practices in digital teaching and learning, digital skills, internationalization through digitalization, virtual exchanges and blended mobility, and more. You can read the recommendations of the first policy dialogue in this slide and also in the project finals document. And there I would like not to go into details, but I would say that all of these themes and recommendations are still relevant in the digitalization processes of higher education. I mean not only in Latvia, but in other countries as well, such as student-centered learning, quality assurance, evidence-based policy making, internalization, and more. In my presentation, I would like more focus on the updated policy priorities in Latvia. And I would like to notice that digitalization is a horizontal priority in the national level policy document, Education Development Guidelines for the 2021-2027. And this document addresses developments of education at all levels. In this policy document, 4 major themes cover digitalization aspects. The first, acquisition of digital skills and competencies as transversal skills during studies, regardless of study field and program. Now the ministry is working on amendments to national regulations, and then a module on digital skills or acquisition of digital skills in different study courses will be mandatory in each study program. We also consider how to assess those skills. The researcher group of the University of Latvia will complete a methodology for assessment of digital skills and student and competencies of students. Another important group which have to be trained at a high proficiency level is academic and research staff. They are planned to offer various programs at the national and institutional level. Some of these programs will be addressed also to industry representatives and specialists. If I come back to higher education, second broad theme is widening the offer of study programs and study courses in the digital environment. Third important theme is using of digital solutions for more effective administrative processes and management at higher education institutions. As a last theme there, I would like to mention the development of lifelong learning system with a special attention to acquisition of digital skills and competencies for different groups of people. And there we also see the potential for micro-credentials. At the national level, significant investments in higher education are planned for the development of digital solutions and high-level digital skills. In Latvia, digital transformation is addressed under the Recovery and Resilience Fund and other funds program. Some of those programs and projects are ongoing, but most of them are in progress or have not been designed yet. However, all programs have to be implemented by 2027. And now I just would like to mention some examples. Academic staff training is organized by several higher education institutions themselves, but we used also an outsourced service. Riga Business School, in cooperation with the University of Buffalo, organized the training of educators from different higher education institutions in an environment where the educators themselves were students and acquire digital skills and methodologies for studies which have been already tested in practice. At the end of November, during the Europe's Forum for 5G Ecosystems in Riga, as a side event will be the opening of the Common Service Center for Higher Education and Research Institutions, which shares IT infrastructure and provide centralized common IT services. It is very important for higher education and research institution because now from the point of the system level, various digital services and infrastructure are fragmented and divided between institutions. I would like to point out also that in Latvia we have special attention to STEM studies because dropouts in these studies are high and not all students have sufficient knowledge in some subjects in their previous education. Of course, it is more broader issue than digitalization, but in cooperation with international partners, we are working towards offering adaptive learning courses for a variety of students and programming courses as well for teachers. In my last slide, I would like to emphasize internalization of higher education, which could raise competitiveness and improving the quality of higher education. And this is also one of the priorities in Latvia. On behalf of the ministry, we highly appreciate a method of peer learning and coordination of policies at the European level. The project OpenU supports policy reforms and policy innovations. It means that we policy makers also need to find new approaches and seek more effective tools for implementing policies in a very dynamic environment, but within less flexible system. It would be a challenge. But if I may, as a former institutional coordinator of the Erasmus program at the University College, I believe the results of the project OpenU would be very valuable to foster blended and digital mobility across Europe, and it could offer a new opportunity for students. I also very thankful to all partners of the project, and my special thanks to DAAD colleagues for coordination of the policy cluster, to Kathleen, Dagmar, Katerina, and Saxia, and of course also to our leading partner, Julian and Yasmin from the Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne University. Thank you very much, all.
Thank
Thank you, Madam Messina. I've seen a lot of nodding in the room while you were presenting, so I think you left quite an impression, so that's good. Next up, I think it's Portugal, and we have Pedro, thank you. We have Pedro Filipe, yes, from the Portuguese ministry, so he's going to present how are things in Portugal right now when it comes to policy.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. I will have a brief presentation for you all. Hosted by the Ministry of Science, Technology and Higher Education. The OpenU Project third policy dialogue took place in the context of the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union, taking the presidency motto, "Time to deliver a fair, green and digital recovery." Experts from Portugal discussed the policy cluster partners, with the policy cluster partners, how the OpenU project could contribute to a fair and inclusive digital transition in the specific context of European higher education. Building on the national policy perspective as well on perspectives from practice that we had from two universities, I will next address some of the main conclusions from the discussion, followed by the ensuing recommendations. Okay, these are some of the main conclusions derived from the discussion among the policy cluster partners and invited stakeholders. They reflect the insights and practice given during the meeting, as well as on the guiding question of how to target policy support to ensure inclusive digital higher education and mobility offers. Participants emphasize the value of flexibilization and personalization of learning paths to cater the needs of students and non-traditional students. They underline the importance of the social aspect of digital learning and teaching, and express the need of flexible support services for students, teachers and staff that are mindful of different life situations. They welcome a mindset of team culture, communication without barriers, and recognize that guarding mental health is also important. Participants reaffirm the virtual and blended mobility formats facilitate access for learners. However, the aim is not to replace physical mobility. They support the idea of funding opportunities in the field of innovation and teaching and learning that puts students at the center and give them an active role in the call applications. Participants reiterated the issues of access and connectivity. They acknowledged the importance of being mindful of the digital gap and emphasized the need for investing in infrastructures, devices, and skills development. Participants also discussed the role of micro-credentials in making digital higher education more inclusive. They emphasize the difference between national contexts regarding lifelong learning, continuing education offers, as well as the unresolved questions around the common definition, accreditation, recognition that needs to be answered. Participants concluded that taking participatory approach to shaping the digital and international campus is an open, inclusive way, is the way forward. Regarding the recommendations on further development of the OpenU project and the Bloom Hub have been extracted from the previously addressed conclusions. Regarding the Open project, participants emphasized the need to do more research, as in the OpenU project experimentation, into the change in pedagogy and that goes hand in hand with online and blended formats of education and mobility. This evidence can form the basis for future-oriented policies. In relation to the Bloom Hub, participants recommended that relevant resources should be featured on the Bloom Hub, such as links to the inclusive mobility platforms and CM project. Participants reiterated the issues of access and connectivity, like I mentioned in conclusions. If possible, the Bloom Hub should also work with low bandwidth connections. They also welcome a multilingual approach to Bloom Hub. This is my presentation. I just want to say on the personal note, since this is my first meeting in the last meeting of the OpenU project, I'm happy to be here. And as has been said before, I really wish that this isn't the end for the project, okay? Just a new start, as it's been said, so I can contribute more and give more insight to the future and also to the Bloom Hub project and platform, which I believe it's very good for everyone involved. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Pedro. Now for kind of staying locally here, I guess, for the Belgian perspective, or at least Flemish perspective, we have Magali Soenen. I was going to say Boeken. I don't know why I'm thinking about books. Thank you so much. And yeah, a round of applause.
Thank you very much. And let's go to Belgium, Flemish community. Yes, so I want to inform you on the topics that we talked about in our policy dialogue that was held in October 2021. So Daiga, she mentioned that in the meantime a lot of things have changed since their policy dialogue. For us it isn't the case, it's only 1 year ago, and we talked at that occasion on a very sexy topic at the moment, the micro-credentials, and we tried also to link the topic of micro-credentials to the OpenU project. So we started our policy dialogue with giving a national perspective on micro-credentials and on our legislation within Flanders, which does not really mention micro-credentials as such, and that hasn't changed in the last year. But our Flemish system provides a very flexible learning already since 2004-2005. So all our higher education programs are very flexible, and one could consider each course in higher education as a micro-credential if we take into account the definition set by the European Commission as well as by the MicroBall project in the European higher education area. Next to that, we have also on other levels within higher education some types of micro-credentials, like for example in postgraduate education we have offers of minimum 20 ECTS credits, really organized to foresee professional development, very specialized courses, or broadening of competences for lifelong learning students. And then next to that, our higher education institutions can also offer lifelong learning courses, and those can be of all different kinds. It can be lecture series, specific courses requested by companies, for example, and for that there is no governmental funding and also no legislation. So this came out as a challenge, let's say, for Flanders, because we have these three levels, different ways that micro-credentials can be offered. So some rationalization or at least some common understanding would be necessary there for the future. And this is something that we are currently also taking up within the Recovery and Resilience Fund. So in Flanders, the projects within this fund fall under the Higher Education Advancement Fund, and in that initiative we focus on the further development of lifelong learning on the short term, but also with a long-term perspective. So a lot of projects are currently funded through this system in higher education institutions, and a lot of them are also related to micro-credentials and to lifelong learning. Now, if we then further went to see the institutional perspective, we had a few of our higher education institutions also presenting their current initiatives on micro-credentials. And there we saw that many of our institutions started to offer micro degrees, micro masters, micro whatever. You have a lot of different terminology for that, and also different possible setup. So some of these micro degrees, they exist of courses that are already there in regular bachelor or master programs. Sometimes they are composed by totally new courses, or it's a combination of both. So this is something that is growing bottom up from the universities. But this term micro degree is also not officially defined yet or recognized in Flanders. So students do get certificates, and they use the flexible system that is used for bachelor and master programs. They get credit certificates for each course they pass, but the term micro degree as such is not yet in our legislation. So these were some outcomes of our discussions on micro credentials, and then from that we had some recommendations towards the project and towards the Bloom Hub. So what came out of our discussions is that really the learner's needs should be always put at the center. We should also use IT solutions that are user-friendly, and yeah, we thought that that was central to ensure also the uptake of the Bloom Hub in the university alliances. Furthermore, continued exchanges between the institutions and the policymakers is really important to support further the awareness of the tools, the frameworks and the guidelines, and ensure that the current uncertainty, we do have some frameworks now from Microvol, from the Commission, but I think that still in many countries this is work in progress, and a lot of things are still developing. So we think that there is still a need also for critical discussion and also for experimentation within the institutions on this. And then a last recommendation was to share the EADTU guidelines for higher education institutions that are focusing on the design and development of joint micro-credentials through the project's networks and the Bloom Hub. Then as main conclusions coming out of the policy dialogue on micro-credentials, we thought that a common understanding of micro-credentials is crucial. And as said, we already have in the meantime some definitions, some frameworks, but it's still work in progress in many cases. This is also something that we are taking up from the Flemish side, also in the Bologna process. We are still working, for example, on guidelines for higher education institutions with regards to the quality assurance of micro-credentials, recognition of micro-credentials, how they can be taken up in qualification frameworks. So this is something that we are doing together with different stakeholders and with all the ministries in the Bologna process. So this is still going on. And not only at international level, but also in national context, these legal frameworks are necessary, but we should not be too strict. There should be room for flexibility, for experimentation, for innovation, because everything is so changing so rapidly, and as the other colleagues here from ministries might know, legislation is not changing so rapidly. It takes a long time before something can change in legislation. You have a whole process that you have to go through. So don't make legislation too strict, but leave it open enough to allow for these new innovative courses or programs. To be taken up successfully, micro-credentials also need to be complementary with existing higher education systems and programs, so not replacing, of course, bachelor or master programs, but provide an added value and be open for students that would not necessarily take a full bachelor or master program or for lifelong learning. And going further on this added value, the micro-credentials should also have their service to society, providing the academic skills. Interdisciplinary is a buzzword there as well. We see a lot of micro degrees that are really composed of different courses, of different bachelor programs, but really focusing on a very specific topic looked at from different angles. So this is also something important. And as well, inclusion was mentioned before. Also, micro-credentials could facilitate inclusion, and having new target groups, new groups of students, also give them the access to higher education. Then we also talked about digital credentialing, also within the framework of Europass, and in a lot of countries this is also still work in progress. And lastly, what we also mentioned was the streamlining of solutions for data portability, creating links to initiatives like the European Student Card, Erasmus Without Papers was mentioned before. So trying to link everything together is also something very important. So I mentioned a lot of things. And as said in the beginning, the policy dialogue was in October last year, but we are sure that there are still a lot of things that are work in progress and that will keep on being work in progress also for the next years. So we look forward to see how everything that has been developed also in OpenU can further support this work in progress on micro-credentials, but of course also on the other topics mentioned here by the other ministries. So I'm looking forward also to further cooperation with all of you, and thank you for everything we did together. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sunan, for your very insightful and important presentation. Now, crossing the border to Germany, we have Kathleen Clancy with us again from the DAAD. So, stage is yours again. You know how everything goes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. You will see a lot of me today, so I'll keep it short and sweet. And also we're going into German priorities with our concluding recommendations. So our high-level authorities meeting took place at the beginning of September in Berlin with representatives of the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And so we kind of have three main things. For one, we have the initiative towards open education. There's a very recently published strategy on open educational resources, which is not available in the English language yet, but I did speak to the, yes, it's Germany, but I did speak to the publishers, and they said that they were working on having it translated, so I will be happy to share that then. Also, there's kind of a similar approach to the Bloom Hub, an infrastructure approach to create interoperable systems for cooperation. So it's a networked infrastructure for digital education platforms that are already in existence, which the German government is currently putting a lot of emphasis and also resources into. There's also been some criticism that there was not enough involvement from the civil society actors in Germany, but I think me going into this debate would take on a much longer time slot. And then, of course, we have also, speaking as a representative of the German Academic Exchange Service, internationalization is supposed to be fostered by various digital tools. For one, providing infrastructure and technical solutions for international mobility workflows, for academic recognition. I also work within the digital credentials field, so I can also mirror a lot of what Magali was saying there. Then also use technological innovation for more visibility of offerings in the international education sector, integrate new teaching and learning formats into curricular, strengthen international collaboration through online teaching and learning. We've all heard about blended, and understanding that recognition practices remain complex. And with that, yes, I think we're done. I just want to add, there's some people listening also in the live stream and watching. You're also feel free to pose any questions in the chat, and we'll be able to address them later. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again. And last but not least, we have the director of the Erasmus Student Network, Wim Gabriels, who's going to give the perspective of students on this whole matter, which is, I think he knows a lot of things about that. So give it away.
Thank you, Nina. Is it okay if I stand up? Keep standing? Great. Okay. Yes. So I want to give a little bit of a student perspective to all of the discussions that we have been having on digitalization, and maybe also more specifically on how to facilitate interactions between different education systems so that mobility, cooperation, and learning exchanges are feasible. So at the end of the day, I think it was mirrored by many of you. We don't believe that digitalization is an end goal. It's a means to reach and improve accessibility, to improve inclusion inside opportunities, and in order to make studying abroad or studying and transferring credits from different education systems to make that more inclusive, we need to facilitate the process through digital technology. Now, what we did in one of our researches, we actually asked students which scenarios would have helped you make a decision to study abroad, and we saw that more information on the types of programs available, hearing from students who have been abroad, and hearing from employers which skills were valued, were elements that were very valued. More information about the different host countries, or more information about different destinations, and on the impact of outward mobility were key elements that were coming up from students' responses. So we see a lot of students take part in kind of activities that are informing from universities about how programs work to take part in, whether it's an exchange or whether it's a blended program. But still, a lot of students are missing information about what type of funding is then available for them to participate in these type of activities. They would like more coaching and support with application processes, or coaching and support with which activities or which courses or which university to go as a to select as a host. And this is also applicable to if you're trying to follow a micro-credential from a different university, which one to pick from, where to find them, right? At the end of the day, the Bloom Hub is trying to find solutions for that, but also the university plays a role in finding the coaching of the student to get to the right skill set at the end of the day. And what we also notice is that a lot of students would like more one-on-one conversation or more peer impressions from other students on the ground, so that they can see, on the one hand, you have academics maybe or administrative staff expressing experiences from them and why they think it's important, but they would also like to see more peers expressing their opinions about the experiences that they had. Now, when we look at this, we see three types of barriers that are quite interesting for us to look at on why do people not take part in a specific opportunity. And we see that institutional, based on regulations or program mechanisms, are barriers for students, while environmental backgrounds are related to their personal background and their societal factors. So this can impact their access to mobility, their access to the information rather, and also just their personal backgrounds. But then they also have attitudinal backgrounds that are more, or attitudinal barriers that are more related to the belief systems and emotional background that the student brings to their education. And very often this leads to internalized barriers for them to kind of say, okay, no, I need to focus on this specific thing, or this type of opportunities are not necessarily put in on my educational path, so this doesn't this doesn't apply to me. So we usually try to summarize it kind of as for institutional barriers, we need regulation change. So we need to make all of the regulations that the ministries were saying, trying to make it more flexible, trying to make it more accessible, so that the thresholds are not high. But at the other end of it, we need to find and make sure that there's additional support for provided for the students in order to participate in all of these elements, as well as making sure that the communication towards students runs smoothly and efficiently so that they are aware of all of these opportunities. So when we looked at the recommendations, we kind of looked at, okay, before a student takes part in this type of opportunities, during these opportunities, and after. And so for us, we want to make sure that access to information and diversifying program offer remains an important priority, whether you do this through micro-credentials that were mentioned, blended mobility opportunities, but to also engage with student population to identify their needs and interests. Many of the colleagues mentioned it. A student-centered approach to how these programs are designed is quite key. And then to inform students about technical details, but try to also move towards what I mentioned before, a coaching perspective. How do you make sure that the student selects the right opportunity for them to improve their skills, passing from this is how it technically works to actually trying to coach them into finding the best set of opportunities that fits their profile. I think that's also an important step forward, which would, where, for example, peer-to-peer approaches could be helpful, showcasing other people's experiences and best practices to the students in order for them to identify more easily with the opportunities that are being offered. Next to that, ensuring digital access is foreseen before departure, whether it is through a micro-credential or a mobility opportunity. It is important that these type of accesses are available before the student actually starts and moves or starts accessing these elements, and so that the transition into the new environment can be made more smoothly than it is currently happening for students. Very often it's there's on arrival or at the start, everything digital still needs to be figured out and nothing was informed to the students before, and that then causes extra hindrances for the student in order to participate or enroll or catch up with the first assignments that are being sent their way. And then during, so ensure inclusive communication. Very often institutional communication is very institutional, meaning that we need to make sure that the information is relatively accessible to students, and that we ensure equal representation of diverse minority groups so that it's clear to students that this is accessible to everybody. Make sure the technical infrastructure and information provision is properly explained and accessible, and pay attention that in times of crisis and or with regards to support requests, that this is also accessible in these cases. If a student is part of your ecosystem within micro-credentials or within a different way, maybe what is their type of enrollment? How are they part of your ecosystem at the university? Do they have the same access to information when they are there? Do they have the same access to the support that your institution might have when it comes to, for example, mental health support, when it comes to stress, or what happens to when another COVID pandemic hits and people need access to this information, but information might only be provided in the local language and not in the language of the support students. And try not to limit the experience to the courses and the university campus, but also engage the student with the local context. I think it was mentioned before, at the end of the day, these type of programs are designed to improve the competences of young people to understand the global perspective and the challenges we have as a European/global society. If then the ecosystem is limited towards the university campus, do they really understand the local context of which your education is being offered? Maybe not, right? So that's something really to think about and to take into account, and make sure that there is access to the sending information as well, right? So once a student is at the host institution for their time being, they should still have access to all of their information for sending institutions. If they don't, lose their registration, their enrollment processes, to make sure that they can still access what level of information they need. This comes back also in the after part, right? So when students complete their processes, whether it's through micro-credentials, an exchange, etc., that they're able to, for a long time period, access those resources so that they don't, automatically rolled out or off-boarded at the start of the next semester, because then they don't have access to the courses, the examination material, etc., that they have been following, and they might need this for recognition elements, facilitation of these recognition processes, and the outcomes of the activities are still a problem for students. And we want to make sure that students remain having access in order to, throughout their processes of their education, can access that and make sure that they can integrate it within their maybe degrees, processes that happen over time. I think, yeah, that was the last remark. So if you have any questions related to that, you can always reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wim. Thank you also to all the speakers once again. We have a 10-minute coffee break now. Everything is in the back room, so you can serve yourself however you like. And after 10 minutes, we're going to meet again here for some second round of presentations and then a short discussion. So people who are online can also take a break now and can join us later for presentations again and prepare any questions that they might have, so that we have a very dynamic, interesting 30-minute discussion. Thank you and enjoy your break.
Well, Dagmar is.
Few more people coming in. I'm just waiting a second. So welcome back from the break, everyone. Now, like the, I don't know, main part. I don't know. I don't want to like rank them, but like the final part of the afternoon is coming up, and we want to present the final regional, national, and European policy recommendations developed in the OpenU project that have been the result of the intense work over the past years. And this was only possible through the engagement and the openness of all the partners involved. So first of all, let me thank all of the partners and stakeholders involved in their contributions in this process. It couldn't have been able without you. So before delving into the recommendations, let us swiftly revisit the beneficial effects of the policy dialogue as an open feedback loop for the policy recommendations. It is actually threefold. Firstly, the project's developments on the level of the institutional policy and practice are informed with input from the perspectives of governmental and EU policy making. I mean, we heard about the national priorities from each of the cluster members just before the break. That was really interesting. Secondly, the ministries are provided with input from the level of the institutional practice. This refers to the evaluations of the institutional policy and practice in the context of the project. For example, the project's research evidence that is presented to the ministries in the context of the high-level authority meetings. And thirdly, another beneficial effect is that the ministries engage in peer learning and knowledge building. At the high-level authority meetings, they share knowledge and exchange of best practices with other ministries concerning national or regional strategies and policy initiatives that support digital and international collaboration in the higher education sector. So a lot of benefits to this. And as discussed beforehand, the final policy recommendations are based on the evidence gathered over the course of the entire project. And in this, the project supports future evidence-based policy making that can achieve systemic impact on regional, national, and European level. And of course, the focus points might differ from stakeholder to stakeholder, which result in different priorities. And as demonstrated on the slide, here a sneak peek into one of our collaborative working boards. This was considered a relevant point and also reflected during the policy cluster process. And quite a number of recommendations have been formulated, which is a great thing, but also quite a lot to take in. So maybe first you might find it helpful to take the meta-level perspective, just to be aware of the different ways that one can think about and structure this body of recommendations that we will present to you today. Aligned with the overall project aims, the recommendations address three spheres: offering quality online and blended learning, strengthening cooperation, and enabling mobility. Also, different levels are addressed. The OpenU policy recommendations shall support the upscaling process as foreseen for projects of the Erasmus Plus Key Action 3 line. And upscaling is here understood as a vertical process that includes the policy level of the European Union with special regard to the European Commission. And it is also understood horizontally, providing guidance for the implementation and usage of resources developed in the project to member states, higher education institutions, and the European University Alliances in particular. And this includes recommendations on institutional level, initiatives and projects to be involved, and also taking into account existing digital resources and tools that can be connected to the Bloom Hub. So we have these different levels that should be addressed: the institutional practice, institutional policies, as well as national and EU-wide regulatory frameworks. But moreover, the cluster also collected infrastructure requirements for future-proofing, and we will highlight some of those for you in a bit. through each of the high-level authority meetings, though they had like a different priority topic at their core, there was nonetheless similar ground covered in the meetings. So by bundling all the recommendations under overarching topics, we were able to identify themes, to condense and to minimize these overlaps. And these guiding principles, there are some guiding principles, but there are also some other clustering approaches, like the topics of administration, technology, curricula, and skills and competencies. And the recommendations that we will present to you in a sec are not always fitting only in one of the categories, but we still found this kind of clustering helpful to think about this overall body. So to look into the guiding principles, the policy cluster identified foundational thoughts or guiding principles that actually can be applied overall in all the spheres and throughout the recommendations for all the levels. Most of them we have actually also heard previously by the national presenters, but I think this only underlines that they really have a guiding character, which are the use of the state-of-the-art IT solutions, user-friendly design, the student-focused approach, the multilingual approach, to work evidence-based, and to continue exchange and enable long-term collaboration. So another variation of the "this is not the end." Okay, I think with these lines set out, here's another sneak peek into a working board, so you can kind of see the process, how this all came about, and then let's start with the actual recommendations.
Yeah, I think again we put this in just to the sneak peek, just to illustrate the difficulty of the task that lay ahead of us, just because we had a lot of recommendations and a lot of different levels and categories, and it just made, like, from a conceptual point of view, it made our work quite challenging. But so please show some understanding when we go through our final recommendations, which, by the way, we will also publish on the OpenU website. And we, of course, wanted to do this by today, but my colleague Leo said no, he needs to format the document. It's not going to be published before he has done that. So we will be getting a very nice looking document to you, hopefully in the next week. Right, so continuing on. So institutional practices, you can see here we've kind of tried to categorize on the color coded, but that might make more sense as we continue to go on. We have some technological recommendations for institutions. A prerequisite to interinstitutional interoperability is a modeling overarching of system landscapes. So that, and often that doesn't already exist at institutions, or just not on a granular level. So, for example, used interfaces, data flows, and workflows, and the aim is then to achieve a linkage between CMS and LMS. And this is then also stressed by the second point, saying learning management systems and shared teaching learning platforms must be able to connect with various interfaces. And I am aware that this is something people who are working on a policy side often say, because it just seems so simple. Oh yes, why, let some API deal with it, and it doesn't have to be my problem. And I would like to also express my sympathy for anyone who's working on a technical viewpoint, because this is also just thrown about as though the technology, and often the technology is already there, but not in all cases. So I do want to stress that this is a critical point. We also have co-use as a recommendation, so use of technical infrastructures across universities. And that also means joint acquisition and introduction, meaning that you can also merge resources within university administrative systems. Then the idea teaching and research should be linked to development. This is a bit of a question whether this is really a technological process, or could also be, of course, a part of a curricula or of the administrative process within universities. But this is really the hope that topical research could then also improve quality within the university's own structures and be linked to their research profile. Communication structures between central and decentralized IT providers need to exist across universities as well. Right, then you can see we've got the red line is the administrative recommendations, so raise awareness of applicable policy frameworks, because often that just really isn't, like, it's kind of difficult to, I'm working in the policy field and I find it quite difficult to understand what frameworks are relevant to myself and to my work, and I assume that if this is not your day job, it is even more difficult, so we really need to find clear language to communicate with experimenters, as Firas also mentioned. Yes, and also relate experimentation to these. Establish shared best practice databases. This is also reflected in a lot of national policies. And find institutional strategies with clear and instructive language. Again, I think a lot of digitalization strategies have come into existence within the past, with the 4 years of the project span. But I think they could often be formulated in a clearer language for experimenters, for example. Then we have some points, recommendations on the curricula. So definition of evaluation points, define future goals clearly and make existing or potential risk areas transparent with the help of evaluated gains, losses assessments. Again, this also kind of goes into change management, or how do we actually deal with mistakes or difficulties at an institution, and it's often a topic that is not very popular, understandably, because evaluating things can be painful if it's not always a positive review. And then we also recommend the use of the European maturity model of blended education and guidelines embed. The last point we had color-coded within the skills and competencies framework, so support and incentivize teaching staff. I'll move on to the I'll move on to the institutional policies. So just to make clear, we've come from practices to policies, and that is also a bit of a difficult, a difficult categorization, because of course, whatever a policy leads to practice, and in the best case, practice also leads to policy, so it's also not quite clear. But this is the way we have tried to frame it. So regarding the first points, regard curricula, again, emphasize virtual mobility and incorporate credit courses, and this means offering more ECTS credit courses to build a cooperated infrastructure and offer systematic recognition and accreditation. I mentioned it in the German policy slides as well. This is a complex matter, but of course we can still make this recommendation. Then we have a skills-based recommendation, so extend virtual mobility at European university alliances to develop international consciousness and also competencies. I really enjoyed Wim's point on also making sure that people are skilled and have access before the mobility experience actually begins, and this is of course also applicable to virtual mobility. And then we have some technical points. So financing, of course, this is, we are sitting in Brussels, we need to talk about resources. So the recommendations, financing of inter-university infrastructure solutions, and this would, of course, could lead to cost effectiveness. I mentioned this also with acquisition processes, which is being piloted in Germany for the National Federated Infrastructure, or Networked Federated Infrastructure. They keep changing the name in Germany, which is why I get confused as well. And so common inter-university infrastructure could also then lead to a standard setting role, possibly. And then another technological point, infrastructures at universities must be compatible with European higher education area recommendations and frameworks, leading into the point beforehand, but that, for example, single digital gateway or EIDAS regulations. Then we have some institutional policies, again, on the administrative side. These are all relating to administration, the top four. So strengthen alliances and cooperation with cross-sectoral partners. So this, for example, also partnerships with the labor market or different educational sectors. Pay attention to experimentations. Yeah, very important and often forgotten because again it's hard work, and systematically evaluate and assure internal quality assurance processes. The last point is regarding to skills. Offer training for teaching and staff. It's quite simple, and maybe also pay them for doing this training. I think often we have a problem that there's certain set amounts of working hours for academic staff that they are paid by, and that is the top limit. And for example, I think we need to have an understanding that in all levels, but especially also with academic teaching, that external courses can be necessarily and are a part of their expertise. And moving on to the national and European regulatory frameworks, and then Dagmar will, we're nearly at the end, but yeah, I'll continue. So we have national and European regulatory frameworks on an administrative level. So we're saying please promote intergovernmental and cross-sectoral collaboration, also with funding schemes, audit the adequacy of legal frameworks and perhaps amend these. And I think all policymakers know that this is a long and arduous process. Involves stakeholder communities in decision making. For example, I should have given this recommendation to the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research for their federated infrastructure. It would have probably helped with a better kind of opening of their new infrastructure project. And plan long-term funding mechanisms. I think, again, project funding leads to a lot of difficulties. And we also have one guiding principle in this as well. So we need to find, we need frameworks that support, and also funding opportunities that support shared resources, common infrastructure, joint tenders, and that's often a problem if we're constantly within a project-funded nature. It doesn't lead to I know that this is also changing with things, but of course, if either my organization gets 3 staff or another organization gets 3 staff, it doesn't necessarily lead to collaborative endeavors. I think you know what point I'm trying to get to. Then we have an administrative point. Next slide, I think. Here we go. So we need to adjust guidance on quality assurance systems and adapt these to digital and blended learning environments that often doesn't exist. We have a small typo here, which I enjoy. It says activate ecosystem, but I meant ecosystems. But I actually think that's quite funny because often the echo chamber, etc. But activate systems with school, industry, and governmental dimensions, and bridge different educational levels and regions. And I personally know how difficult this is working within a higher education sector, and I really know very little about vocational training, which is seen as very important or is very important to the German educational system also. And the last points refer to curricula. So boost an evidence-based culture in education through systematic evaluation programs, generate independent evidence and reviews. You see that some of these themes are just going from different governmental levels, which we'll get into in a sec, and define a standard criterion of digitalization infrastructure in the European higher education area. I think that's very difficult, and you could probably fund another 2-year project on the definition of a criterion, but yeah, it would be very helpful. And with that, we will continue with the infrastructure requirements.
Thank you very much. Exactly. So to set up the higher education sector in a way that is beneficial in the long term, there are some overall infrastructure requirements and aspects that surfaced in the OpenU project and that the cluster deemed relevant. So we thought we also do a cluster of those recommendations. So let's dive into them. So first of all, it's about establishing a transnational infrastructure that links the existing infrastructures and resources and also makes them searchable via a meta search engine. I think that's kind of like what the Bloom Hub demonstrated in a wonderful way, that this is actually feasible, and it's actually also serving very well the university alliances, the European University Alliances, which it is already rolled out in some parts. Then the idea would be to publish digital developments on public domain, and also make sure that that it is documented transparently, so that open APIs are available for further development. And it would be helpful if the principles for digital development are actually put into practice, because a lot of thought has been gone into those already. So the use of open standards, open data, open source, and open innovation design, with practicing those ideas of designing with the user and designing for scale right from the start, that would be really helpful to kind of make the future-proofing kind of baked into the substance of the endeavors already. The goal should be to ensure digital inclusion by implementing solutions for accessibility in the digital space, so to apply universal design, to optimize search engines for EU funding and tender opportunities, and also to a decentralized higher education system. It might be beneficial to shift towards a kind of more participatory approach, rather than like hard policy making with defined goals from the start. Another idea would be to reduce the disconnect between what central educational support services would like to implement and what academic and teaching staff can and would like to provide. So the communication that can be like really demanding, as we learned in the project, especially if so many different stakeholders from research, from practice, from administration, from policies are involved, to kind of get them connected and get them aligned on the goals. That is very helpful. And on top of physical infrastructure, to integrate technical equipment with within advanced knowledge in the form of best practices, of operant and operant resources, to boost the interculturally as well as the institutional competencies at the different levels, would be really helpful. It is about providing infrastructure and workflows for academic recognition, which is really complex still, and a huge hurdle for mobility. It's about defining common criteria for digital infrastructure and assuring quality as part of partnership agreements. Another recommendation is to include access to IT equipment and support for students, and also to rethink the physical digital infrastructure. And last but not least, it's establishing communication structures between the central and decentralized providers of IT infrastructures and services and their users across the universities. So another communication point to end on. So maybe we have a look at the overall layout again.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention again, and maybe this is a good open question, but we could also talk about this later, is in what form would these recommendations be most helpful to practitioners? You can see here the different layers we were working with, both, so we had the thematic layers, curricula, technology, skills and competencies, administration and guiding principles that aren't shown, but then also learning, mobility and cooperation, and then governmental layers of European strategies, national strategies, institutional, regional strategies, and I was nearly going to put infrastructure frameworks, but I didn't put that on there, so because I thought that would be too confusing. But maybe before we publish the recommendations, it would be helpful to know in what kind of clustering would be most effective as kind of a guidebook for use. But now you've listened to our recommendations, and I think we would like to hear from you, and I need to give the Erasmus Student Network 1 minute to change to our Mentimeter presentation. But this also gives you 1 minute to get out your mobile phones and or your laptops that might already be open. I'm going to go get my mobile phone, and we can, there we go. We already have a QR code. And I know the internet in here is a bit difficult, but we can try, see if it works out. And can we change to the Mentimeter? Perfect. So you go to www.menti. You can tell I'm old because I said www. No one does that. You can go to menti.com and enter the code 844-14729, and we can have a little, and also of course to everyone watching from home, please join us. So this is my icebreaker, but I also like it because it gives us an idea of the demographic situation in the room. You only have one option, yes, sorry. But there was also, if you were a teenager at a later stage, there was also Discmans that had they buffered the extra 10 seconds or something, just adding. Okay. Sorry? I missed that one. Yeah. So you can tell there's not that many digital natives in the room, I'm afraid. But thank you for sharing. And I'm also happy to hear that the Walkman is making a comeback because, quality never loses. We can maybe go to the next slide. I'm not sure if I can do that. No, I think, yeah, perfect. So after reflecting on our recommendations, what would you recommend? This is an open question. You could also use this slot to answer and tell me in what way you'd like the recommendations to be structured, but also maybe just to point something that we missed or something that you think we should emphasize in a different way. I'm happy. I think this is going to turn into a word cloud. So be precise, and then maybe we can elaborate. I'll let the microphone go around the room. This is very interesting. So interoperability, ethics. Whoever wrote that will have to elaborate. So get ready. The microphone is coming for you. Oh, we have another student-centered versus real. Also interesting. learner-centered cooperation, mutual trust, also very important in the digital sphere. Outreach, inclusion, listening. Is there anybody who would care to elaborate on a point they entered in Mentimeter? Okay, well, who put ethics? Oh, okay. Could you? The microphone is coming for you.
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, from the experimentation, we have round in Paris 1, and what comes out is that the technical point is not the main point, actually, and people are not people are really ready to go into the digital if there is some warranties about the ethic and the use, and that's why I was surprised and couldn't see in your recommendation nothing really centered on ethics, like something like do not replace human by digital, or never replace a connection between students and teacher with the connection online. So which are kind of really recommendation that focus on learner-centered, and also focus on the fact not the technical issues, but how you're going to use it, so which is really politics, in a way. So that's why I'm something on ethics. So how are we going to how are we going to use these technological solutions?
Thank you. That's a really interesting point. I think we just never went there. It was kind of it seems like a very kind of a basic principle for all, but absolutely maybe that could be added as well to the guiding principles. But I suppose in that granularity it didn't come up in the high-level authority meetings within the policy, or the working meetings in the policy cluster. Any other elaborations? Coaching and onboarding I think is also important, and maybe could be, I think these are all important, but I think that could be structured, emphasized as well. Oh yeah, we have one more.
Yeah, it was me who put coaching and onboarding, because it's related to the point that I tried to make earlier, that and also what was said here earlier, that at the end of the day it's not only about the digitalization process, it's about making sure that people are coached and that it leads to a bigger purpose rather than the digitalization as an endpoint in itself.
And what do you mean with not too hard policies? Like,
that's me. I saw some words like from decentralization to hard policies. I think that if you will say anything like that to professors, for example, it may be really difficult to explain them that it's a great idea to cooperate with other universities, with etc., etc. Shortly, no, it's not correct word. That's all.
okay, though that of course does bring us to this definition of what is a policy. I mean, in some ways, a policy also, I mean, yes, it can adapt, but a policy is also strict by definition, I'd say, but that's interesting. Johannes?
Thank you. So actually I put the word global, which was meant to symbolize what we've had, the global framework or global enabling on a national or European level, but with local implementation. The problem is at many points the local institutions are willing to cooperate and come together, but they lack the means and they lack some kind of framework where they can actually act together, and this needs to be brought. It needs to be made available so that they actually are able to carry out this cooperation on the same level. Because if you try to level the field for everyone from bottom to top, it's
very, very, very difficult given alone the numbers of players. So I think the combination that was already mentioned is essential, so that we do not have hard policies that dictate top to bottom, but that give the opportunity to come together and find on the same level a mutual trusting, cooperation between the universities, between the institutions that are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just seen one more thing. Student-centered versus real. Any takers?
Yes, it was mine. Yeah, because I think it's a bit this kind of discrepancy and challenge also when we heard about the French ministry, because on one hand you tackle massification, as it was used as a word, but then you also talk about student-centered. So I think it's a kind of dichotomy and challenge, because on one hand you want to focus on not individualization but to being student-centered, but on the other hand, you have to tackle numbers and realities, and you have to find the right balance. That's why in fact I meant versus reality, but I was limited by my letters, so I tried to do it that way. But yeah, I think this is one of the challenges also, because and certainly we talk a lot about inclusion, but how do you put it on the ground? And when you talk about student-centered, it's also how do you take the diversity on board, which is higher and higher with the time.
Absolutely, and of course some processes by nature aren't student-centered. I mean, there are just processes where the university fulfills its role as educator and administrator, and for example issues a certificate of some sort. But I suppose I think it's still a good guiding principle, but absolutely I take that on board. And apologies for my character minimization. I wasn't thinking clearly when I made this. Any other open comments? Firas.
Actually, I'd like to add one thing that's from the previous presentation that you did. Many important issues have been raised, and I'd like to emphasize on the value that could be co-created from the partners when they work together. If you agree with me, we have too much resources and sometimes overload and overflow resources. But what we need exactly to manage these resources and add value from these resources, and as well as not the resources as a physical resources, the operant and the operand resources together. So these resources have a value when we cooperated, when we add value, when we deal with it in a right way, in a framework of sharing these resources and use these resources. Again, the resources not only, and the infrastructure as well as, not only, it is part of the infrastructure, not only as a physical infrastructure, but also again, operant and operand resources together. So, so you mentioned that in somehow in the presentation, and I'd like to emphasize on it once again. Maybe the framework that we aimed or we are planning for, maybe it can be a unique solution in this regard.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. If we could move on to the next slide, you will be able to set your own priorities. So the title of today was Setting Priorities within Digital Education Policy. And of course, this is a bit skewed because we only give you 6 options when you're allowed to choose 3. But I think this is a good way for us to kind of focus and maybe also publish some sort of short info sheet or something. So at least all have been chosen at least twice. That's always good. Okay, so we have a teeny tiny winner with interoperability of systems, platforms, and hubs, followed by user-friendly design, and then a learner-focused approach. I realize these differences are minimal, so we're not. This is in no way represent. I understand, but it's just more of a get a feeling of the room. Then we have continuous pedagogical training for staff, digitalization of administrative processes, and a multilingual approach at the end, which I find interesting for a European project where, of course, we have a lot of extra workload because of different languages being used, even just within the commission and translation policies. But I think it's still, of course, one of the main recommendations. And we had a slight change, I think, but yes, okay. So, and I think this also hopefully shows that we're not completely in the dark. I mean, if you didn't want to vote and said none of these are important to me, you can raise your hand now. Okay. And then we'll go to our last slide for today. Make a wish for the future of digital education. How could we further strengthen cooperation between European higher education institutions? And I think with this you have more than 25 characters. Oh, staff exchange, absolutely. I would like. We have the DAAD also has a lot of wonderful offices around the world, and I think staff exchange would be helpful to me personally also. You can also make more than one wish. I think with the genie it was 3, so. So, staff exchange, support exchange and mutual cooperation through coordination, valorize teachers' investment in digital education. I agree. Be resilient, standardization, common tools, academic cooperation. If you could scroll down, please. A bit further. Oh no, okay. I believe one of the main next steps is to make it more tangible for stakeholders by taking recommendations of practical ways of implementation. So I think this is also, again, finding a clear and common language and together. Physical mobility should include preparatory virtual mobility. As a student, I can apply to any short program in the EU and have the ECTS in my country of origin be recognized. If only it were so simple. But yes, absolutely. I forgot we're making wishes. I forgot. Integration of different initiatives and tools on a national and international level. Live my life through staff, student, teacher exchange. Keep on working in interdisciplinary teams across borders, across educational sectors to approach the European education system. Allow joint degrees in the European higher education institutions. Are they not? There are some joint degree programs, no? Some. We can maybe get into this in the reception. Promote amazing research and pedagogical projects able to connect students, teachers, and staff. Stop reinventing the wheel, but valorize what already works. Yeah. Development of leadership, implement the created solutions of the project OpenU in practices around Europe. So a first step was taken. Continue mutual cooperation. Administrative interoperability, yes, also my dream. Joint degrees, mutual diploma recognition, and interoperability of platforms. Hire specialists who understand the public universities of Europe in order to provide a visible offer with free access, I think, probably. I want another 2 wishes. Rethinking the structure and simplify to reach an integrated European, to really reach an integrated European education area. Seamless mobility for students and staff, including administration, often forgotten, and enrollment. Okay, I see we have a lot of wishes, but I think a lot of wishes can maybe be turned into a near or distant reality at some point. We now still have around 20 minutes for an open discussion, but we've already spoken a little bit, but perhaps there's some more questions also from the Erasmus Student Network, maybe, perhaps. But I think nobody will be disappointed if we finish a little early as well. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for the very engaging, also at moments very funny interaction here. We do have a couple of minutes more left, but I mean, it's the end is for the ending and closing speech. So I think it's your turn again. You're still gonna. Okay. Well, then I just give you the floor for the final speech, and go ahead.
So everyone, thank you for being here with us today. With this event, the main work of the OpenU policy cluster is done. The policy recommendations have been formed and will be tweaked. Due also to your input today. And I think maybe now we have talked about the policy recommendations, like we can close off this part, and maybe I can reflect a little bit on how this project work was for me, because both of us, actually Kathleen and me, we stepped in quite late in the process, and it was really, really great today to actually, like, I mean, we saw the inputs from the work packages before, but today was really nice to kind of get the feeling of how they actually came about, and like who was involved and what kind of work went into it, and also like what kind of obstacles you had to overcome to actually get here today into this room, which is a great achievement in and of itself, I think. So congratulations to y'all for this. I think it's a great job. And for me personally, I think the format of the project is a really interesting one. I mean, obviously, having a complex project workup, my eyes go out to the colleagues from Paris, has like very, very huge obstacles. It brings huge obstacles with it. It's very challenging, yet it is super, super fruitful, because like bringing together these different perspectives, like the researchers, the educational practitioners, the policy makers, administrative perspectives, student perspectives, and get them all connected, not just like on a punctual level, but like over a longer period of time through working on actual cases that will then potentially influence the life and the learning life of the people around them. I think it's a powerful thing and actually worth putting the effort into it, because like not only resulting in greater impact of the project, creating better results of the project, but I think it is actually really nice from a human perspective to actually see what your work can create and can be a part of, because you kind of not only see like the little part of the process that you're a part of, but you can see it in a bigger picture. And I think that is very valuable actually just for your personal satisfaction of the work that you put in. I find that very beneficial, and though this being also like kind of a challenge for us, jumping in at the last minute, it was really, really a nice experience, and I really enjoyed meeting you all and working with you, even if it was only for a short time. So like my personal recommendation is, especially when jumping into innovation endeavors, which I think at this day and age, there might actually be quite some places in the world where it's needed to address things in a different way. So I think it would be really beneficial to think in bigger pictures and to think taking more stakeholders on board earlier, developing things together, and like keeping this kind of idea of the project also in mind, and like keeping this not ending with today when meeting future challenges and when going about any innovation endeavor in the future. So I think this is like my recommendation with which I want to end my part of the final words. But since I mentioned like it is a really tough job, and I think the toughest job was with the colleagues from Paris. So I think it's only fitting to have the last words coming from you guys of this today's event. So I want to hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Yasmin, actually, you could join me, right? You're. We had one last slide to show you, because in order to remind you, this event is available on YouTube, as you already know. The final policy recommendations from the countries, 6 countries, will be published on the OpenU website. This is the address. The Bloom platform, developed by Freie Universität Berlin, again, is accessible here and already includes all pedagogical guidelines developed by EADTU. Thank you to both of the organizations. We also have scientific publications, as you know, stemming from the experimentation cluster. P-learning sessions have started being published. The first 2 ones have been published those last 4 days, and 3 now. One more today then? Okay, great. Out of 15 totally, I think. 20 out of 20. And this is also available here. And Yasmin and I remain here. We're reachable at on these emails, of course. We are in Paris, based in Paris, but we will keep working till March, I believe, on this project, even though this is funded by the December 19th. So you can, of course, contact us anytime.
I mean, you already said everything, Julian, but just once again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for your commitment during the whole project. Thanks to the participants who have joined us online. And as many colleagues have said, this is not the end. So I hope that our collaboration will remain even after the end of the OpenU project. Thank you.
Let's go. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to everyone who's worked on the project since 2019. It's been definitely not an easy few years in every aspect, in higher education especially, I think. So thank you all for your constant work on the project and congratulations on almost finishing it up. And I mean, I haven't worked on a project myself, but hearing you today, I feel like all of you are very, very still inspired and motivated to work on certain aspects of it. So I have my fingers crossed for you that that motivation stays with you. And everybody has already said it's not the end, so don't make it the end. And I just want to say just one last round of applause for everyone that's been involved in the project from the beginning to this very end, including speakers, participants, people working in the consortium. Everyone, please, a round of applause for all of them. And the organizers.